Okay, welcome to today's webinar, everybody. We're really excited for this topic, and it looks like we've had a lot of registrants, a lot of interest in this. We are going to be talking about what to do after a guest injury, an incident response and report playbook. And really excited to have with us Leah Corrigan. Before I jump into an introduction of her, just a little background on myself. So I'm Brandon Lake. I am the CEO of WaiverSign and Resmark Web. We offer digital waiver solutions to our clients. We also offer booking management, marketing automation to our clients, and we offer website development and design, as well as SEO and paid ads management. And so we're happy to bring on incredible people like Leah to help all of those in our industry who are both clients and followers to learn more, be educated, help improve their business, and everything that we like to help people create a foundation that will help protect you and your business into the future. Really excited about this topic today, and really excited to have Leah with us. Leah's been with us before, but let me give her a quick introduction here. Leah is someone who truly understands the outdoor industry, and I think having her legal perspective and her personal perspective is really powerful. She is the founder and managing attorney at Recreation Law Group. Over a decade of litigation experience, including wrongful death and multi-million-dollar cases. She's known for providing smart, responsive legal support to recreation businesses around the West. She holds an AV preeminent rating for her ethics and legal skill. And the coolest thing about Leah, I think, is that she's not just a lawyer. She's also a former wilderness guide. She's certified in wilderness first response, swiftwater rescue, avalanche level 2. It's really cool to have someone with that level of experience, not just speaking from a legal perspective, but speaking from a practical experience perspective. She's been in the trenches. She's been doing what a lot of us do on a day-to-day basis. And I love the combination of those things that she brings to the table here. So as far as our topic today, we've been talking about doing this for a little while. We're excited to have Leah cover this. I think we talk a lot about waivers and our booking platforms and our websites and so forth, and how all of that ties together. But Leah's going to take things to the next level today. We're going to really talk about incident response, because having that foundation is important. She'll talk about that a little bit, but what you do, what you say, during an incident and afterwards, and the order that things happen in can be really important. I've heard her present some of this before, and I think it is wonderful, and you're going to love it. Normally, she does a presentation like this, or will train companies, and it can take 5 hours of training and going through things. So we really condensed this today. She's going to hit the high points, and I think you'll have some great takeaways. So with that, Leah, I will turn things over to you.
Thank you, Brandon, and thanks for having me. As Brandon said, this topic is extremely broad and the details matter a lot. So if you want more training on this, we can certainly help you with that. But what I'm here to give you today is really an overview of the big picture, explaining some important foundational concepts, and then talking through specifics of things that you should do and shouldn't do. And as Brandon said, the order in which you do them, some things that you may not have thought about that will help you confidently respond to a critical incident. So rough agenda that we're going to talk about today is here. I'll talk a little bit about why you need to be prepared. You're obviously here because you need to be prepared, but I think understanding that the stakes are pretty high right now is helpful for you to understand and to help your teams understand. I often felt as a guide, and feel now with my employees and my staff, everyone does a lot better if they understand the why behind what you're asking them or telling them to do. And so part of this is me giving you the why so you can give your staff the why in more direct terms. We'll talk about laying the foundation for an incident response. And this is really about pre-planning. And the reason I'll spend some time on this is there is nothing that I can tell you that will really help you if you didn't lay a proper foundation before an incident happens. I can give you some tips. You may be able to mitigate some of the worst damage of a bad response. But if you haven't laid these foundations, and you'll see why, then the incident response is not going to be nearly as competent as you want it. So we'll talk a little bit about those foundational elements. We'll talk about incident command structure briefly and the importance of that. We will discuss everyone's favorite topic, which is emotional competence. I trained a group of cowboys yesterday, and they loved this topic, surprisingly. So we'll see how you guys do with it. And we will discuss investigations, really an overview of investigations and some common issues that I see that I'd like you to avoid. As Brandon said, I come from this dual perspective as a former guide. I actually am again doing a little bit of guiding, and as a lawyer my background is in litigation, but we also help companies with front end things like laying that foundation that we'll talk about. Most of my perspective on this comes from sitting in courtrooms or in depositions, handling wrongful death or serious personal injury cases in the recreational context, and seeing where things went wrong, where they went well, and what I could do as a lawyer for my clients to help them really get prepared to deal with these critical incidents. So first things first, why prepare for a critical incident response? And these are the things that I really wanted to highlight for you. We're really in a different era with the prevalence of lawsuits, litigation, and things going wrong in the recreational context. And there are a couple of theories I have on this, and I think some of these will resonate for folks. First, there's just more litigation in our society in general. There are a lot of theories about why that is. Some of it is about plaintiffs' lawyers trying to make a bunch of money on things where someone didn't really do anything wrong. There are some totally legitimate cases out there as well. But all told, we're seeing just more litigation in general. We also have a really kind of scary insurance situation developing for recreational entities and activities that are at all deemed risky by underwriters. Insurance companies are not real big on taking a lot of risk right now, particularly since the wildfires in California, some big claims in Florida related to hurricanes and extreme weather. The insurance industry broadly has been taking quite the beating and paying out a lot of claims. And I think that's created this situation with underwriters and with company owners of these big insurance company where they're not really that excited about insuring super risky businesses. So for those of you doing activities in the outdoor space or indoor space that are deemed at all risky by underwriters, this is creating some issues. How does this relate to incident response? Well, the more insurance companies pay out on claims for incidents that were handled poorly, the worse the insurance situation gets for everyone. So insurers will drop out of the market. Companies will get dropped and become uninsurable. Outdoor permits depend on insurance. So this is very high stakes stuff. And I've seen this play out with my clients, many of whom are very solid operators who have been in situations where they may become uninsurable or have rates triple or quadruple. So it's high stakes individually, and it's high stakes for the recreation community more broadly, whether that's indoor or outdoor. Another factor here is guests are a little bit different. So folks are less physically capable generally and a little bit less grounded in reality. And I will count myself among those people. I'm not saying that it's those other people. It is all of us as we spend more time indoors, spend time staring at screens, our attention span is shorter, our ability to pay attention to our surroundings and mitigate our own risk is lessened. And we are becoming more and more unhealthy as an American population. And so that impacts your risk because someone who's less capable is going to be more likely to end up in a critical incident. And then we have extreme weather and environmental events, and you all know what those are and how that might affect your operation. But broadly speaking, this is a topic I'm passionate about because I'm quite worried about companies who aren't well prepared to deal with these incidents and that impact on you individually, but also the impact on the broader industry for outdoors or indoors. The final why prepare is just a reminder, and I think this is good for staff, particularly younger staff who don't yet have a sense of mortality. You're dealing with people's loved ones. Should be a very weighty, heavy responsibility. These are my most cherished people in the world. You'll be happy to know they now have a few more teeth than they did in this picture. But just a reminder, you're dealing with people's kids and moms and dads and the people that people get lost and that blows lives apart. That's what generates claims, is when someone's life is irrevocably altered by a loss or a really critical injury. So that's the most important reason for why to be prepared. We're going to quickly jump into legal framework. I'm a lawyer, so of course I want to talk about the law. But most importantly, what I've found after talking with clients and training staff is if you understand how these claims are made, you'll understand better what your legal duties are and how to lay this foundation that you'll keep hearing me talk about for incident response. If you don't lay a good foundation before an incident happens, you just really don't have a prayer of dealing with it competently. It's too hard, it's too complex, and things don't go well if you're just operating on instinct if you don't have that foundation. So negligence, everybody's heard of negligence, and I'm not going to take you through a law school class, but I want to impart a couple of principles that relate really specifically to incident response. The first one is duty. So you have a legal duty. A negligence claim is, does the company have a duty? Did they breach that duty? Was that breach of duty the cause of the injury or death, and are there damages? So we're going to focus on that first element because I think it's going to help you understand why this foundation is so important. So your company, and your staff have a duty to mitigate foreseeable risks. So think about that for a second in terms of your own operations. What are the foreseeable risks that you're trying to mitigate? And to act as a professional would in the same or similar circumstances. Your actions must be reasonable and within industry standards. That's your duty, and that's the duty of all of your employees. So the operation broadly needs to meet those duties from start to finish when you're dealing with those human lives that are coming to recreate with you or to be part of your activity. So breaking down that duty a little bit. One aspect of this duty is the duty to inform and warn participants. So part of your legal duty, again, is to inform and warn regarding the risk of death or injury. So let's have folks put in the chat quickly if you're okay participating. I think this would be useful. For your activity or the business you're running, what is the risk of death or injury that you worry about, that you're informing and warning your guests about? So as you think about that, your liability waiver is the primary way that you inform and warn your guests. This warning should include a discussion of the inherent risks of the activity or service that you're offering. And again, this is a legal duty. So if you have a duty to inform and warn, and a plaintiff makes a claim, and your liability waiver doesn't contain any warnings about serious injury or death or any warnings about inherent risk, and neither does your website, and you don't send an email confirmation with videos of a safety talk, if I, as a trial lawyer, can't demonstrate that my client did inform and warn participants, that's going to be a problem in litigation, and you won't have laid this foundation for incident response. And you'll see how these things fit together in a minute. So you need to lay that foundation. Reservations, calls on your website, safety talks, all of those places are places where you have to lay that foundation of informing and warning that needs to precede the activity. Brandon, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I appreciate you going through this because I do think I have a couple of thoughts. One, I want to just mention Leah is amazing at helping you walk through this. She actually, so I'm also the owner of one of the owners of Western River Expeditions and Moab Adventure Center. So we are in this space together with all of you. We've created these software applications and so forth to serve our own needs, but lots of people use them all around the world. And she actually was really great at helping us very recently. We're just finishing it up, go through all of our waiver documents, which of course we've had for a long time, but as things change and we learn more and we go through certain experiences with our business, it's wonderful to have someone like her be able to walk through those documents. And Leah and other attorneys have been helpful at helping us kind of walk through our digital waiver process as well, making sure that the way that the language and the flow is working there is done in a way that's defensible and that they're comfortable with. And I think that's really powerful to involve legal counsel to help you walk through that. Not just write the waiver, but everything else, and be able to find a solution like WaiverSign that allows you to immediately access the waiver should you need it. Know that it's securely stored. All of that is happening. But it's not just the waiver. I mean, you mentioned, reservation calls, website too, Leah. And those are some things that sometimes we don't think about. I think we get into our marketing minds and we just want to put the best videos, the best images, the best copy. We want to sort of quell everyone's fears that they might have and just say it's all going to be okay, right? But there is some language that we do not want to be using. And Leah's helped make us aware of that too as we look through our website or a video on our website or photos even, like we can do some things that really kind of ruin the foundation in a way of what she's talking about if we do it wrong. And if any of you are worried about that, I'd suggest reaching out to her, have them walk through. If you get into a position you're like, we need to step back and redo our website, we'd be happy to give you a quote on that. We can go through, and we're always trying to be cognizant of that too as we help clients work through this as well. And just kind of, we're not the legal people, but if we do see some of that, we might say, you might want to have a discussion about some of this copy. It might not be right. One last thing that Leah's been helpful with too is thinking through what happens from website to booking to signing the waiver and any communication in between. So Resmark, for example, has a series of automated emails. And that's another area that sometimes we overlook. Like, what are the communications happening before, from the time of booking up to the time of departure, or the time of the activity or the experience or check-in or whatever that might be for you? Is there communication happening? Can we, warn and inform during those periods too? And I think the answer is yes. I think, Leah, you've helped with a lot of that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Brandon. That's helpful. So the way that this all ties into critical incident response, and you'll see this as we keep talking, is say I'm your guest and I'm participating in your activity. Let's pretend it's a zip line or rafting or whatever. I'm bringing my sons to participate. I don't know anything about the activity. I've never done anything like this. I'm from New York City, never spent any time in this kind of an environment. Your liability waiver doesn't really talk about risk. It just says some legal gobbledygook that's hopefully enforceable, but I don't really understand it. Your website doesn't really talk about inherent risk. And you haven't sent those follow-up emails that say, look on our FAQ page or consider this essential eligibility criteria. And I embark on that activity and one of my kids gets seriously hurt. The reason that matters to me as a lawyer, and it's going to matter in critical incident response, is you now have a parent that feels like they were not given enough information to make an informed decision about the safety of their child. And now that parent is very, very angry. Anger is what drives lawsuits. And if you have a really angry person or a really difficult emotion when you have a critical incident, and layer on top of that, you didn't lay that foundation, that those heightened emotions and those missing pieces are going to make everything else so much more difficult. Whereas if you lay a really good foundation and you know you've done that, and your guest knows you've properly informed and warned them and given them that respect to make an informed decision, that's an easier person and situation to deal with, even in the worst case scenario. That's the importance of doing this in human terms, but also in legal terms. It's really going to protect you on the back end. For instance, when we write or help clients with incident reports after a critical injury or fatality, the beginning of the report is about the entire pre-booking process. What information was on your website? What information was in your waiver? What's very specific language about inherent risk that was in your waiver relates to the incident that happened. And that's going to be a big part of that investigation, is that the entire customer process. So that's why these foundations are so important. The second aspect of laying this foundation and legal duty is you have a duty to be prepared to mitigate foreseeable risks and have competence within industry standards. So mitigation of foreseeable risks means you've thought through what the risks are and you've made a plan for how you mitigate those risks. So in the zip line context, there's a risk of falling from a zip line. So there's redundancy where you clip in or based on your gear. In climbing gyms, it's similar. If you're in the indoor gym space and you have treadmills where people can run really fast, there's that automatic shut off on a treadmill where if you fall down, it's going to shut off instead of pull your fingers under it. So there are ways that you mitigate those foreseeable risks, and you have a duty to do that as an activity provider, indoors or outdoors. How do you do that? With a risk management plan where you're thinking through the risks and how to mitigate them, and that's documented, and with staff training. Those are aspects of your legal duty to the participant. The other aspect that we're going to touch on here, obviously, is competence in critical incident response. If you're doing an activity where something very bad could happen, then part of your duty is to be prepared to deal with that very bad thing. So having a critical incident response plan, a written plan that works, that is now industry standard. That's something you really need to have. And if you don't have that type of a plan, I would suggest you look into getting that, because that's part of that legal duty. You should also have your staff trained in critical incident response. That training can take many forms. We do in-person trainings. We have a digital training for staff and companies. There are different ways to go about that. You could design your own training, but you need to have your staff be ready to deal with that. And if you don't give them training, you can't expect them to be ready, just like anything else. So globally, this is the way I like to think about it. Obviously not my quote, but I think it sums up my feelings on this issue and my experience with clients really well. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You will fall to the level of your systems. I have seen that repeatedly, and that is even with the very best, very smartest, most experienced operators. It's still just a really big job when this happens. And if you don't have those systems in place to back you up, if you haven't laid that foundation, you probably aren't going to do it very well. So critical incident response plan is something you should have. An important consideration, I won't talk a bunch about these. You can look on our website if you want to know more about this, but whether you design it or you use a system we've designed or another system, the important thing is to have it be checklisted and very carefully organized. So a critical incident response plan should not require you to pull a binder off a shelf that has 17 pages of writing on it when you're like, something really bad just happened and I need to deal with it. It should be super organized, checklisted system. We've designed a system that's been tested that we know works, that is checklisted, but checklist is really what I want you to think of, not just dusty binder on a shelf with narrative. That's not going to work for a plan. So in summary, for laying this foundation, you must satisfy your duty to inform and warn. Waiver is a baseline way to do that, but we talked about some other ways to do it. Your waiver needs to be very, very carefully drafted. When I talk to clients about risk management in terms of budgets and what you should prioritize, the waiver is literally the foundation of your house. Your operating entity, so an LLC or a corporation that protects your personal assets, your liability waiver, and your insurance is what lays that foundation for the rest of your risk management. That's not a place to skimp or copy a form. You have to be very careful in that drafting, super state law specific, and there are a lot of techniques and tricks to draft a waiver in preparation for litigation. You also need to satisfy your duty to mitigate foreseeable risks. So whether that's with a risk management plan or a set of policies and procedures, that's something that's important to do as well. You need to satisfy your legal duty to be prepared to handle competently handle a critical incident with a critical incident response plan and a staff that's trained in that incident response. Those are industry standards. That is baseline at this point, and you would be smart to implement those things. Without that proper foundation, your house will crumble under the weight of a critical incident. It's just something that's too hard to deal with if you're not quite prepared.
Leah, can I just interject a couple of questions as we move away from the foundational discussion here? There've been a couple that have come up, and I think maybe in context of what we just discussed, while it's still kind of fresh, this would be great. So we talked briefly about websites. Somebody asked, can you elaborate just a moment on sort of some of the things, if you were to review a website, what would be some of those things that you would be looking for?
Well, the obvious one, but it's obvious and people still miss it for the reasons you described, Brandon, when you're trying to make guests comfortable and make people have fun, which is literally the entire point of your business. You can go too far and make something that looks in hindsight like a guarantee of safety. So that's kind of rule number one. You don't want to make any guarantees of safety, and you don't want to make any claims that you can't back up. So another one that I'll see frequently is, we have the most experienced and best trained guides in the business. Unless you can objectively prove that, you shouldn't phrase it that way on your website, because a plaintiff's lawyer will say, you have misled my client when you said that you had the best trained and the most experienced. That's not true. They came with you because of that representation, and that's false. So those kinds of things are important. In terms of more positive things that I see that I like, putting a video of your safety orientation up on your website is of someone giving a safety orientation. That would give your guests before booking the chance to have a pretty good sense of what they're getting into. I think that's really helpful. Having an FAQ page where you are answering questions that relate to inherent risk, like do boats ever flip on raft trips, as an FAQ, and answering that honestly and giving the person a chance to digest that in the website. I also like to see essential eligibility criteria. That's another huge subject we can't dive too deep into, but Google that if you don't know what that is. That's another thing that's useful to see on a website. Did I answer the question, Brandon?
That's good. And I think there are ways, like I don't know if this is, you can say that's a terrible idea, Brandon, but like for our guide stuff, we've tried to use language like, each of our guides participates in 300 hours of training before they lead their first trip, right? It's not necessarily making a qualifier, it's just stating a fact. Like, this is what we do. And you sort of infer from that, oh, they're pretty serious about having good guides, about training them, right? But we didn't say they're the best or they're whatever. And I'm sure we still have some language like that, right? There's something we did recently. Some of you may have tuned into it. We did a 5-part series of how to use AI to kind of craft content for websites, for emails, for all of this stuff. And we did an exercise where we uploaded 500 customer reviews into AI, and we used it to generate all this content. And Nikki, if you have a link to that, you can send it out in the chat because it's a great thing to look at. But we went through this exercise, and it was constantly like ChatGPT was constantly giving me feedback or content that said safe. It was like, I said, don't tell me, I don't want this in my copy that you're qualifying my trips as being safe. Like, don't use that word. We'll come up with other things that ensure peace of mind. But it would keep doing it because a lot of our guests say that I felt safe, right? It's important to them. And that is one other question I'll throw out there because I'm curious myself. Like, what if we're not saying it, but a guest says it? For example, in a review, they say something like, I felt safe and secure knowing that, these guides are so well trained or whatever. I felt safe the whole time. Something like that. Is that a gray area? Is that okay to have a guest say that?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's totally okay because you're not making the representation. And the other point too I like to make is I'm actually not allergic to the word safe or the concept of safety because that is clearly what everybody's trying to do is to make it as safe as possible. The distinction to understand is there's inherent risk in any activity. There is no way to eliminate that risk. So making a guarantee of safety is saying, by our training and experience, we can eliminate any risk of injury. And obviously you can never do that in any context. So saying we prioritize safety and training of our guides in these ways, as you said, Brandon, by just stating facts, that's great. And you should do that. And it does reassure people and it should. But guaranteeing safety or using language where that seems like it's an absolute, that's what I want to be careful with. And that is a little nuanced. And that's where it can be helpful to have someone who understands this stuff. We have risk management consultants that have been business owners, and I've trained in this, that review website copy to say, cross this out, fix this, change this, rephrase this. If you're like, I don't really get this, then reach out to somebody that can give you an objective opinion.
Love it.
Yeah.
No, that's a great explanation. One other thing that's a kind of a foundational question too, as we're talking about this, is insurance. Someone asked a great question about, can you touch on the proper insurance to have in place for water sports activities, boat charters, paddleboarding, et cetera, liability, workers' comp, et cetera?
Yeah. So baseline, it would be commercial general liability insurance with per occurrence limits of at least $1 million of per occurrence limits. And depending on how many trips or how many people you have come through your operation in a year, you want aggregate limits of, 3 million would be pretty average. So aggregate limits mean if you were unfortunate enough to have multiple incidents, that those aggregate limits would cover each of those incidents. So that's baseline, is that commercial general liability insurance. There are a lot of other types of insurances that could apply to your operation. So I'm not totally comfortable going beyond the commercial general liability because this is not my area of expertise, but workman's comp that's also something that is baseline to have to cover your employees. So CGL and workman's comp, I would say, are the baseline policies.
Okay, perfect. Two other quick ones here, and then we'll move on to the next section of your presentation here. This is a good question. So somebody said, my organization leads free bicycle rides. Does it make any difference that we're offering a free service and not one that requires payment?
Good question. So that will depend a little bit on state law, but generally speaking, the duty sections that I put up on the screen, the reason that you have those legal duties to operate as professionals would in same or similar circumstances is because you're being paid to mitigate risk as a professional at mitigating that risk. If you are offering a free service, depending on the state you live in, the duty would be slightly different, but lesser, but you would still have a duty of just reasonable care under the circumstances. that would, I think, still be a duty in a free context, but that is a really good question.
Okay, and last one, real quickly. We had a couple people ask as we're talking about waivers and so forth. Do you offer waiver review without requiring like a retainer? I think people get a little nervous, right, when they start thinking about, oh, I'm going to get a lawyer involved, right? And like, it's going to be so expensive and it's going to be a lengthy process. Maybe just touch on that for a second. How does that work if somebody wanted to use Recreation Law Group or you for reviewing a waiver?
Yeah, so you'll see that I'm like more of a people person than a business person in this context. I hesitate to say this in a big group, but if you send me your waiver, I will always look at it. And I'll have people do that all the time. They'll say, we may need a waiver. Can you look at my waiver? And I will look at it because based on the length of time I've been doing this and my interest in the subject and my litigation experience, I can look at it very quickly and tell you this thing has a lot of holes or it's pretty good. Over the years, I have learned not to attempt to fix other waivers, folks' waivers that have been drafted by other lawyers or pulled off of chat or whatever the case may be. Because when we draft a liability waiver, there is a very specific structure and process. There's a lot of interaction for us with our client because we fully understanding your business, everything you do, how you use subcontractors, what your activities are, how your insurance works. That's all part, what your guest policies are. That is all part of this waiver, contractual waiver document. Because it's so foundational, it has to be very carefully drafted and very specific to your business. With our firm, it's a flat fee. It kind of depends on what you're doing. It is an investment, but our clients, the way we design waivers, you should never, ever have to replace it. It should be foundational, evergreen. When your operations change, you call us and we say, okay, then we need to fix this, change that, and we send it back to you. You shouldn't be buying a waiver from a lawyer who doesn't fully understand your business, because that is a situation where you do have to do it over and over and over and over again. So did that answer it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, there's going to be questions about cost and so forth. I just think there's probably so many variables there, right? Like you're happy to take a quick look at it and then maybe you can provide some additional information. I mean, I'll speak from my own experience, having just gone through this with our company. I know Leah, so we had an instance where we had a good waiver drafted by an attorney, but we actually had some laws change. So we had the National Park Service allowed us to use some new language in our liability waiver that we couldn't use before. It was simply an acknowledgement of risk before, but now we were able to use some language that helps tighten it up for us. So it was an opportunity to go back in, review, have it rewritten, and kind of go through this whole process, right? And I don't know. I think it just depends how deep that needs to go as you get involved with it. But I'm sure you're happy to provide information of that on an individual basis. It might be hard to quote like it's always this price.
Yeah, can't do that. But happy if you reach out, I can look at your specific situation, and you don't have to. We don't take retainers from clients actually, so you can just call us and we'll see how it goes from there.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's move on because we have so much to cover. So this is what I want you to think about in the first 24 hours. I've kind of summarized after helping clients with critical incidents and dealing with these cases. These are the things that I think are the most important to think about. And we'll talk about some of them in detail, but others just generally. One really important thing is you need to have a command structure. So that means someone has to be in charge and you have to be able to arrange your resources, your human resources, to do all the things that need to be done in a way that doesn't have you running around and bumping into each other and miscommunicating and calling the same person or whatever the case may be. A command structure is super, super important. That is used in emergency response and ski patrols in large organizations and in small organizations. And in our system, like our critical incident response plans are very scalable. We can build them for a business of 400. We can scale them to a response team of 1.5 people or one person and a dog. It's all scalable. You just have to have a system. Calmness is also really important. Drama of any sort is the enemy in a critical incident response. Being very calm is really important. That is one of the reasons why I hit so hard on laying that foundation. The best way to not be calm is to know you don't have a plan, you didn't have a good waiver, and you don't have good policies in place. You're not going to be calm because that's scary and as it should be. So calmness occurs by virtue of preparation. Competence is the next one. Brandon, I'm going to give you this one. Trick question. What is the best way to appear competent?
The best way to appear competent?
Yeah.
I don't know, communicate.
Nope. It was a trick question. You were going to get it wrong no matter what you said. So
Okay.
the best way to appear competent is to be competent, right? There are no shortcuts to if you want the people that you're dealing with, human lives, you've got a very bad thing going. They want to be able to trust you and to have someone who is being very competent in a very bad situation. That is not something you can fake. If you don't have a plan, your staff isn't trained, you're not going to appear competent because you won't be competent to handle that incident. Incidentally, too, just having interviewed and dealt with a lot of traumatized staff and guides who deal with fatalities or critical incidents really puts your people in a bad position if you don't give them the training they need. That's damaging to them personally. So that's another factor to consider when you're thinking about training and staff. Don't put a young person or a late 40s person like myself even in a situation where you haven't given them that baseline training so they can be competent. They feel awful when something happens, and that's going to make them feel even worse. Communication is super important, both within that command structure and then communication with people. So that might be with the injured guests, with the injured guest's family, with your guides, with other stakeholders in your organization who are wondering what's going on. Really solid pre-planned communication is really important. And then the last one, and one that's critically important, is just compassion. Being emotionally competent in an incident will get you a long ways. It's not always going to keep you from getting sued, but I have seen that work. Just a very high level of preparedness, professionalism, competence, and then emotionally competent response by the company that definitely has averted lawsuits for companies. Not going to do it every time, but you want to do everything you can to avoid those outcomes and to feel good about the way you responded as a human being. In terms of incident command structure, just to touch on this really briefly, if you have would be in the recreational context. If you're in an urban setting, this would be a little bit less complex, but you have an on-scene response. So, on a river trip, for example, you've got your guides on scene. You have yourself, the company, or the office doing that incident command role. So the person with the big picture in mind is the incident commander who's working off of a plan and off of those checklists. Your on-scene staff should be working off of a smaller checklist for dealing with the immediate emergency. And then you'll be interfacing with law enforcement or EMS or, an search and rescue perhaps. This looks pretty clean, but in a critical incident, if I had a way to do this, basically it turns into a series of crazy red scribbles where you're communicating and communications are missing each other. That highlights the need for following that command structure and being really careful and intentional with your planning. The communications to-do list down here at the bottom for you as a company owner, for your managers, You may be dealing with family. You may be in the position of having to do a next of kin notification where you're letting a emergency contact know that something bad has happened. You may be making hotel and car arrangements, dealing with counselors, dealing with other guests, dealing with notifying your insurance company, calling your attorney, talking to your other staff, dealing with potential media inquiries, dealing with social media that occurs when a critical incident happens. So hopefully this is illustrating for folks why it's so important to have a plan and checklists. It's just a monstrous task to do this, and you'll be doing this when your brain, at least for a while, will be in fight or flight and not operating at your highest capacity in your prefrontal cortex. So having a plan and checklist is really important to maintaining that good command structure and communication. Emotionally competent response. So what's an emotionally competent response? What do I mean by that? And why do I care? Why do I think this is important? I touched on this a little bit. An emotionally competent response, the reason it matters is, number one, it feels much better to do this well when have human lives that have been disrupted or altered. If you don't know how to do this and you're stiff and you're worried about liability, that feels bad to people, and it feels bad to your staff. For me, as a lawyer dealing with these cases on the back end, a stiff legalese response where you're focusing on protecting liability instead of dealing with the human beings, juries don't like that. They want to see someone who they want to be able to say this. They seemed like really good people. They were really well prepared. They were very kind, and this was just an unfortunate incident that related to inherent risk. That's the argument I want to be able to make on your behalf. If you don't have an emotionally competent response and you start looking like kind of a jerk, that's tough. That's really tough on every level. So emotional competence is not a soft skill, it's a super important skill. Now, the good news is most of you as business owners and managers, you already have this. If you're good with people, you have that foundation. I'm just going to teach you a couple of things for how to elevate that a little bit and help your staff elevate it. So an emotionally competent response, it's simply respectful of human life and the human lives that you are dealing with in that moment. It's the ability to be aware of and respond appropriately to the emotions of others. Some of this means just anticipating what emotions could come up and knowing that this is not easy in a critical incident. It's very hard to do, and so giving it some thought beforehand can be really helpful. This is another place that a critical incident response plan comes in. What emotions are likely to come up after a critical incident? So just by way of example, to kind of put you in the frame of mind here, there was a case in Grand Canyon a couple of years ago where it was a motor trip, river trip down the Grand Canyon. A flash flood came over the rim of the canyon onto a camp, and the guides were able to cut lines, motor out into the river. But as they did that, there was a family of three, a father with two adult kids who had just taken his daughter and adult son down this Grand Canyon trip because his daughter was just graduating with her master's degree in public health, and this was kind of a celebratory trip for the three of them. As the guides motored out into the current, the father realized that his daughter was not on either of those boats. So there's a flash flood coming down. There are people on boats. It's complete chaos, very scary scene. And those of you that are parents can imagine this. This is a parent's worst nightmare. Your child is missing, adult child or not. What emotions are likely to come up for that parent in that example, or in any example you can think of for a critical incident? Guilt. If you're a father and you took your daughter on a river trip and that was your idea, guilt is going to be a big factor. extreme fear, when you are feeling guilty and afraid, anger and blame is going to be a close cousin to those emotions, shock, grief. You can imagine all the other emotions that could come up. These are heavy, heavy things to deal with. And if your staff is not prepared for how to deal with someone who's in that kind of an emotional state, it's a lot to ask. And it's a lot to ask of you if you need to make a next of kin notification. So just being ready to deliver that emotionally competent response is important. And the way you can do that is training. This is a question that is often on folks' minds. Is an apology an admission of liability? And I'd be curious if folks can just pop their answer real quick, yes or no, into the chat. I'd be curious to see what people come up with. As you're doing that, I'll tell you my perspective on this. So it used to be, even when I first started practicing law, that if you polled a group of lawyers, they would say, never apologize. That's an admission of liability. That perspective in the legal community has shifted pretty dramatically. And my own perspective, based on dealing with these cases, is that saying to someone who's suffered a very scary situation or a loss or an injury, saying to them, I'm so sorry this is happening, that is a appropriate human response to a difficult situation, because of course you're sorry it's happening. And so would your staff be. Everybody's very sorry that is happening. What I don't want you to say is, I'm so sorry, I was so negligent, this was all my fault, right? That's an admission of liability. Most people aren't going to say that naturally. Of course, you're not going to say that. So you should feel free to say, I'm so sorry this is happening. Don't then go into fault or cause or anything else. Just be able to deliver that basic human kindness. And I think that will go a long way towards making you feel like you are offering an emotionally competent response. Also, juries are just made up of people. Do you think juries, what's your guess? You're sitting on a jury, there was a serious injury or death in a recreational context, and the person says, no one ever even said they were sorry. No one came up to me and understood what I was going through. I never heard from the owners that they even cared that this happened. What would you think about that if you're a juror? Doesn't sound too good. Doesn't sound very kind. So that's my perspective on apologies. In terms of elements of an emotionally competent response, here's what I can offer you. I'm not a therapist. These are just my own observations. Being present and available, being steady, calm, and kind, anticipating their potential emotions, providing information but not speculating. So people are going to want to know what happened and what's happening and what you're doing about it. Providing that information as best you're able, and don't withhold it, but being careful not to speculate. So a classic example of speculation in this context would be, your husband was just injured during our activity. He is on his way to the hospital. He's going to be fine. Unless you absolutely know that, don't say that. That's speculation. And if he turns out not to be fine, you could imagine the reaction that's going to cause. And then express that genuine sorrow and sympathy. I think that is an emotionally competent response. I know we're getting very close on time, and I am also very close to done. So just quickly on investigations. When do you do a full investigation? And this means create an incident report, get a bunch of witness statements, do this documentation. I stole these words from a ski patrol, an avalanche investigator that I work with that now works with me. And an investigation is appropriate whenever a very bad thing has happened. Not a like, oh, somebody stubbed their toe, or sometimes even a broken ankle wouldn't necessarily be a very bad thing. It depends on the context. the way he says it, and I agree, is you'll know it when you see it. A very bad thing, you're going to know if you have a very bad thing. General guidelines, though, if you need a little more specificity, spinal or head injury, anything requiring major and expensive rehabilitation, so fractured femur or any kind of a serious injury, anaphylactic shock, death, obviously. And then the other piece is just if you're getting a red flag from any person regarding the incident, that's another place where if you're like, okay, there's this lawyer on the trip and they're talking about liability, then maybe that's a place where that's a red flag for you and you want to do an investigation. A couple of quick important considerations. First of all, if you didn't lay that foundation we were talking about, good waivers, good inform and warn, good policies, a risk management plan, a critical incident response plan, then your investigation is not going to fix those problems. You're basically just going to be doing damage control. The other thing to think about is just the power of narrative. So a really good plaintiff's lawyer, trial lawyer, their best skill is that they're a good storyteller. So what's the story that a plaintiff's lawyer would want to tell about the injury? And what's the story you need to tell? This isn't about making things up. It's just about documenting concepts like inherent risk and assumption of risk. Don't speculate about cause. You want to analyze, not give conjecture or speculation about how something could have maybe happened. Document environmental conditions quickly and thoroughly. Definitely get guest witness statements. And this is a really key thing for witness statements. So please remember this. You want witnesses, including your staff, to write down who was involved, what did they witness with their own two eyes or other sentences that relates to the incident, when did it occur, and where did it occur? Not why. You don't ever want to give someone an opening to write down an opinion about why something occurred. You can be certain that if you do that, you will have a witness who will skewer your company or your guides for missing something. The guide wasn't really paying attention, the so and such this. So be very careful about how you design your forms so you're not accidentally giving someone that opening on a written form. Last big point I want to make is if you have a very bad thing happen, it's smart to have your legal counsel present to talk to your staff before you debrief them and before they talk to anyone else. Attorney-client privilege would be over that conversation, and that gives the staff a chance to say what they feel bad about or what they wish they would have done differently in a privileged context. If you don't have an attorney present, that's going to all be fair game in a lawsuit. So that's another consideration that's important and useful if you're going to do a debrief. And 1201, I'm done.
Again, if anyone needs assistance, has questions about anything we've talked about, the questions just keep coming here. So if you have questions, certainly you can reach out to Leah. Nikki's going to provide all that information. She's also going to provide a recording of everything here. So if you want other people from your staff to go back and watch through this, if you're thinking about putting together an incident plan, this would be great for them to kind of think about from an overview perspective. If at any point you want to move your waiver into a digital system or whatever that might be, I know a lot of you are already clients here, but WaiverSign, is here and available for you. If you want to look at your website and get into a position where you decide it is time for a rebuild, a refresh of this whole thing, come get a quote from Resmark Web. We'd love to help out with that. And if you're thinking about your booking platform and ticketing and all of that and your communication like we talked about today, Resmark has a great system for utilizing that as well. So hopefully everybody's found a lot of value in this. We're trying to provide, systems, processes, and connect you with people that can really help you be, more successful in everything that you do and reduce the risk around your business and be in a great position. So Leah, thank you for joining us. We hope to have you back again sometime. And thanks everybody for joining us today on our webinar.
Take care. Bye.